We've got it worked out. Administrative law relates to the functions, powers, and procedures of government. Now, some examples of administrative law is like licensing. They set up the regulations for like driver's license, marriage license, security licenses, and things of this nature. It does not have anything to do with criminal law. Of course, with marriage license, it could be. All right, moving right along. Functions, they make rules, and they establish the procedures for getting, for doing business. Now, some administrative law deals with starting corporations. Remember, we started off with how a corporation is formed and what you should do to build an emergency response plan to any emergencies to it. And we talked a lot about the board members and how you have to protect them to get a quorum on a board. Well, each state's law for developing a corporation is different from the others. So you need to be familiar with incorporation laws. Now, they make the rules. If there's a dispute, they have adjudication of the cases. They also have investigative authority to investigate. Now, one of the things that you may equate to this is the SEC. They establish how we do trading of stocks, bonds, monetary things of that nature, and they say how corporations can handle that. They also have a very strong investigative branch that goes out and looks at things like insider trading, and we know how well that works out for the people that do it. They're also responsible for issuing licenses to conduct business, whatever business you have. And they can do prosecutions. Now, remember, I said this isn't criminal law, but they can refer violations of the regulations to prosecutors so that it can be prosecuted. Okay, here's a couple of independent agencies we can talk about here. They get their authority directly from the Constitution. We have the Federal Trade Commission, who establishes how we conduct international trade. They can also recommend tariffs for importing items. The Department of Commerce regulates interstate trade, how we conduct trade between the states and the United States. And of course, everybody knows the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency. Were you all aware they do have an investigative branch? They do. The National Transportation Safety Board is part of the Department of Transportation, and they have an investigative branch. Okay? Okay, the independent agency determines rights. They make the rules, they conduct the investigations, they do the prosecution, and they issue the licenses. And they can issue citation, issue complaints, conduct hearings. Now, did you know the EPA has its own independent court? It does. And they can render judgments or awards if let's say, Marco Oil Company fails to follow their own risk procedures and it results in an environmental disaster, they can be fined, and they can also be forced to pay awards for the cleanup, inconvenience to the local population, reimburse the state and local governments for cleanup efforts. So the EPA has a lot of authority, as all these independent agencies do. So you don't want to cross these guys. A couple of acts we need to be concerned with for the exam. Freedom of Information Act. It regulates the disclosure of information held by the government. Okay? It requires the government to publish how-to in the federal register and make certain information available to the public upon request. Now, we're all familiar with this act because we deal with it on a daily basis. We ask the government for information for certain things. We are required to generate information for the government to put out. But it's fairly restrictive in what they can put out. There are some exemptions to the Freedom of Information Act. Anything dealing with national security, the government does not have to put out, ever. Government's internal personnel rules, they don't have to establish how they discipline government employees, how they hire them, how they pay their salaries. That's not part of the federal, not part of FOIA. And they can also set up what's exempt by statute. There's certain bits of information like, what's a good example? We have to publish the president's salary, we have to publish Congress's salary and the judicial branch's salary, but we do not have to publish the law clerk's salary. It's exempt by statute. Now let's say we put in a proposal for a government contract, okay? What's exempt from that is any trade secrets we put in that proposal, the government cannot give out under the Freedom of Information Act. So our trade secrets are protected under the Freedom of Information Act. We do not have to, like in the case of oil companies, the government does not have to give out geological information that is supplied to the government by the oil companies. That's trade secrets and proprietary information. Can anybody think of any other thing that might be exempt from FOIA?
PII information on employees.
Yep, that's number one on the list. Absolutely. Another thing that would be exempt is if we priced an opportunity with the government, they cannot give our pricing out to our competition. That's protected under the Freedom of Information Act. Moving along slowly at a snail's pace, Privacy Act of 1974. This prohibits the government from giving out our personal information to anybody. What's a good example of personal information?
Social Security number.
Number one. How about date of birth? Health records are covered under HIPAA. You can't put that out. This is the binding law that HIPAA is based on. You can't give out health information. You can't give out personal. They can't give out your address if they have it. They can't sell your personal information like so many stores do out there, unfortunately. It also prohibits your employer from sending out this information. It requires notice and consent. If somebody wants your information and the government has it, they have to get your written consent to provide that information. If you're going out for a position and you're leaving the government, you have to give them consent to give out your employment history. Under the Privacy Act, you also have the right to access your own records. You can access your records and they have to give that to you. And you also have the right to sue for damage by disclosure, whether it's overt or inadvertent disclosure. There was a case about 3 years ago where the federal government, an employee had something like 400,000 Social Security numbers with names on a laptop. They lost the laptop, it got out there, and it was published. The government, whoa, had to pay out big time for that. Okay, Privacy Act continued. Anytime they disclose any information, they have to disclose it. Okay, I mean, they have to tell you, okay? They can only collect and maintain relevant information. How does that apply to NSA? All the information they're collecting on our metadata. Is that an exclusion to this Privacy Act? Don't know. Tune in to this station next week. We'll see what the Supreme Court has to say. The government is also responsible for the accuracy of the information they collect. Not you. They are. And they have to have written policies concerning the storage, disclosure, collection of information, and not the information itself, but how they collect it and disclose it and safeguard it must be published in the Federal Registrar, okay? Not the information they collect, just how they collect it, where they maintain it, how it's maintained, and when it's disclosed. Any questions on the Privacy Act? Excellent. Regulations of the security industry. There's not much here. It's fairly okay. In 1974, a federal commission recommended that the regulation of the security industry remain in the jurisdiction of the state. It varies from state to state what the requirements are. In all states except Colorado, you must be registered as a security company. You must be licensed as a security company. Remember I said that the government had to set up administrative laws requiring licensing and bonding of all companies. Some of the general provisions of this, definition of a regulated service. Now, security services are regulated, mostly because we perform in a bonded environment. Okay, our people have to be bonded, security officers have to be bonded, and you have to have liability insurance for it. So it's a regulated service. Okay. To give you an example, let's take the state of Texas. Okay. You have, the licensing is controlled by the Department of Public Safety. They're responsible, they've been by law made responsible for licensing all security companies. Now those security companies include security officers, investigation services, and locksmiths. Okay, every one of those are considered a security company of one type or another. Now under the security officers, you have unarmed security officers and you have armed security officers. Each one under the state of Texas has different training requirements. They're defining the regulated service and how it's going to be regulated. Now, unarmed security officer has to have at least 30 hours of classroom training to be licensed as a unarmed security officer. For an armed security officer, it's 80 hours, and they must pass a firearms proficiency course established by the state of Texas. Okay? An investigator has to have completed both unarmed and armed security officers training course and 120 hours of classroom instruction as a private investigator. Locksmiths must go through 120 hours of locksmith certification training, and they must be licensed. Okay, every year you pay your licensing fee, as it says right here, and the laws in the states set up penalties for violating the regulations as a security officer, armed or unarmed, investigator, whatever. And you have to be bonded in your state to be a security company. Not only are the investigators and security officers and locksmiths required to be licensed, but the company they work for must be licensed. And they must be licensed in each area they're covering. If you have armed and unarmed security officers and a private investigator, you must hold 3 licenses. Okay? And they set the standards and prerequisites for becoming. You cannot, like you've got to be, in Texas, you've got to be 21 years of age to be a security officer or a private investigator. You must have a high school diploma, and you cannot have been convicted of any felony. Ta-da! So those are the requirements. They standardize it throughout the state. Colorado, all you need to do is go down and get, to be a security officer, you need to go down and get a concealed weapons permit, get a criminal history background check from your local sheriff, and hang out your shingle to be a security officer. That's it. That's the only exception to all this. All right. From the RAND study of 1972, there had to be a uniform government regulations. They sit there and say, said, you know, they have to meet certain requirements. You can't be a felon and be a security officer or a private investigator or anything like that. Then they shoved it down to the state level. Okay, this is your mess. You make the rules and you enforce them. You also have to set up licensing management, make sure that the people get their background check, fingerprints are on file, they paid their fees, they've conducted their training by a licensed trainer, and every employee must be registered with the state if they're working in the security industry. They have to be registered. State sets minimum standards. They do the background investigation, check the education requirements, whatever experience the states are requiring. They establish the bond or insurance for the companies, establish the minimum training programs for each of those areas we just discussed, and you have to establish separate training for separate positions. It doesn't do any good to hire a private investigator who's only been through unarmed security officers course because they don't meet the standards. It also said that every state had to have annual retraining requirements. You had to go through retraining. Now, in Texas, the annual recertification is first aid CPR, must be annually, and your firearms qualification must be annually. That's the same as in Virginia, by the way. I'm not sure what it is out in California. It's been a while since I've been out there, so I don't know. And they had to issue pocket manuals. Okay, it's just a set of regulations that it's in a little pocket notebook that says what you can and can't do. Things in that pocket manual are things like the use of force, when you're authorized to make arrest, and probably has your CPR checkbook in there too. It's been a while since I've looked at them. Any questions on the RAND study? Before this, we had anybody who wanted to be a security officer went out and bought a 38 police special, showed up, bought their uniforms, and they hired on the bank, the shopping center, wherever. And there was no uniformity across the board there. You could get, I think it was Arizona had something like 60% of the security officers working in Arizona prior to this were convicted felons carrying firearms for their job, and they were not authorized to carry firearms, period. So that's when this came about. Regulated industry sectors, private security officers, private investigators, alarm companies, I forgot about them, firearms instructors, and guard dogs. Why would a guard dog be regulated by the state?
They are providing a security function.
It does provide a security function. However, there had to be some form of checks, regulations to ensure that whenever somebody delivered a security or a guard dog to whoever ordered it, that the guard dog met some kind of training requirements. You didn't go to the pound, get the meanest dog in the pound, and turn that loose as a guard dog, which happened a lot. Okay, so whenever we're talking about guard dogs, we're talking about trained security officers. Okay, you can't just go get a junkyard dog and sell him as a guard dog. Doesn't work. So they had to. They wanted to make sure that whenever you turn some, because let's be serious about it, guard dogs are loaded weapons with no safeties whatsoever. Everybody agree with that?
Absolutely.
Okay, so they have to be trained to react to certain things, and it has to be a conditioned response to where it's predictable. The guard dog will sound an alarm and follow the perpetrator, not attack anybody. They're an alarm dog is basically what they are. Only in the military do we have attack dogs. And in police departments, they have canines that aren't attack dogs but have been trained to restrain, and they're well-trained to restrain suspects. They're not trained to attack anybody unless that person attacks their handler. So, as I said, the training was to have the animal respond to certain things in a predictable manner. That's why the state regulates them. Any questions on guard dogs? Okay. As I said, today was going to be short because I screwed up and shoved too much in last week's and tried to get it all done quickly. Do you have any questions for me on legal aspects this week? Would anybody like to buy a guard dog from me? Probably not. Since the day after my wedding, I found out I was not a dog person. My wife informed me I was now a cat person. I have no interaction with dogs whatsoever. All right. If there's no questions, you guys, I hope you have a fabulous day today.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to be sending Stefan the information on how to get onto the website to download these now, and what you're going to have to do to view the videos once we're done. Stefan should have that out this afternoon. Thank you, folks. I appreciate it.
Thank you, sir. Have a good one.
You too.
Thank you. Thank you, Royce.
Thanks, Royce.
You're welcome.